That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and violet, Emily walked home from her late shift at the diner. Her feet ached, her mind was heavy with exhaustion, and all she wanted was to collapse into bed. The quiet streets hummed with the distant sounds of the city, cars passing, a muffled conversation from an open window, the occasional bark of a dog. But then, something unusual caught her attention. A cat. Not just any cat. A scruffy, thin, gray tabby with piercing green eyes. It sat near the curb, staring directly at her, its tail flicking with an air of urgency. Emily wasn't the type to ignore Stray. She had always had a soft spot for animals, often stopping to leave out bits of food for the one she encountered on her way home. But there was something different about this one. It didn't just watch her, it seemed to be waiting. Then, as soon as she took a step forward, the cat turned and trotted away, glancing back at her as if expecting her to follow. Emily hesitated. She was tired, and she had an early morning ahead. But something about the way the cat moved, so deliberate, so insistent, made her curious. Against her better judgment, she followed. The cat led her through a narrow alleyway, past rows of overflowing trash bins and rusting fire escapes. The deeper they went, the more the sounds of the city faded, replaced by an eerie silence that sent a shiver down her spine. The cat darted ahead, pausing only to make sure she was still following. And then they reached it, a dumpster. Old, dented, and covered in graffiti, it sat in the shadows, partially hidden behind a stack of broken-down cardboard boxes. The cat jumped onto the edge, its tail twitching, eyes locked on her as if urging her to look inside. Emily's pulse quickened. Her rational mind told her to turn around and go home. Whatever was in there, it wasn't her business. But a strange feeling gnawed at her, a mix of dread and responsibility. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward. The smell of old garbage and damp cardboard filled her nose, but she ignored it. Reaching out, she grabbed the edge of the dumpster and peered inside. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, convinced her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, it was real. What she saw inside the dumpster sent a chill down her spine, her heart hammering in her chest. And in that moment, she knew her life was about to change forever. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. Her breath was caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. The dim alleyway suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. She gripped the rusted edge of the dumpster, her fingers pressing into the metal as she forced herself to keep looking. Inside, beneath layers of discarded trash bags and crumpled cardboard, something stirred. Not the usual scurry of a rat or the flutter of a startled bird. This was different. It was small, fragile, and unmistakably human. A baby. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The baby was wrapped in a thin, stained cloth, barely covering its tiny body. Its skin was pale, almost too pale, and for a second panic gripped her chest. Was it even alive? She reached out with trembling hands, pushing aside the surrounding garbage, desperate not to startle whatever life remained in the fragile bundle. And then, movement. A tiny hand twitched, curling slightly before going still again. The baby was alive. Emily exhaled a shaky breath, her hands hovering over the child, unsure of what to do next. The cat, still perched on the edge of the dumpster, let out a low, impatient meow, as if urging her to hurry. She glanced at it, almost expecting it to say something, to offer some kind of guidance. But of course it didn't. Her mind raced. Who would do this? Why? And how long had the baby been out here, alone in the dark, left among the trash like it was nothing more than discarded waste? She didn't have time to dwell on those questions. The baby needed help now. Carefully, she reached down and scooped up the tiny body, cradling it against her chest. It was so light, so frighteningly delicate. The cloth was barely providing any warmth, and when her fingers brushed against the baby's cheek, she felt the icy chill of its skin. Emily's instincts kicked in. She pulled her coat tighter around them both, wrapping the baby in as much warmth as she could manage. It let out a weak whimper, a sound so faint it nearly broke her heart. "You're okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it for the baby's sake or her own. The weight of what had just happened settled heavily on her shoulders. She had no idea what to do next. Should she call the police? Take the baby to a hospital? What if whoever had left the child was still nearby, watching? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, and she instinctively held the baby closer. Her eyes darted around the alley, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the cat, still watching her, its green eyes glowing in the dim light. It had led her here for a reason. Emily looked back down at the baby, who remained still in her arms. The cold night air pressed against her skin, but she ignored it. There was no way she was leaving this child out here. Decision made, she turned on her heel and hurried back toward the main street, her heart pounding in time with her footsteps. She needed help, fast. But as she stepped back into the glow of the streetlights, another realization hit her. This wasn't just about calling the authorities and handing the baby over. This child, this tiny, helpless soul, had been abandoned, left for dead, and whoever had done it might still be out there, watching, waiting. Emily's grip tightened protectively around the baby as she quickened her pace, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. She had no idea that finding this child would pull her into a mystery deeper than she could have ever imagined. Emily's legs moved on instinct, her body tense as she clutched the baby close. The city lights ahead seemed distant, flickering like beacons of safety, but her thoughts spiraled in a storm of uncertainty. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her. Every shadow stretched longer, every sound felt amplified. The baby remained still in her arms, its warmth barely noticeable against the chill of the night. Emily's breath hitched as she glanced over her shoulder. The alley was empty. The cat had vanished. She needed to think. Fast. Her first instinct was to go straight to the police, but something inside her hesitated. Would they treat this as just another abandoned case? Would they do enough to find out who had left the child to die? And what if they didn't? A part of her wanted answers. Emily quickened her pace, heading for the only place she could think of, her apartment. It wasn't much, just a tiny space above a laundromat, but it was warm, and right now, warmth was all that mattered. As she reached her building, she fumbled for her keys, her fingers stiff from the cold. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, shutting the door quickly behind her. The familiar scent of detergent and old would fill the air, grounding her just enough to catch her breath. She set the baby down gently on her couch, unwrapping the flimsy cloth to get a better look. The child couldn't have been more than a few days old. A girl. Her face was delicate, her tiny fists curled against her chest. But what struck Emily the most was the quietness. Shouldn't she be crying? A pang of worry clenched her stomach. Was the baby sick? Dehydrated? She had no experience with infants, no idea what to do next. Her phone sat on the coffee table, the screen reflecting her own anxious expression. She needed help. Her fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to call 911 or someone she trusted. That's when a knock echoed through her apartment. Emily's breath caught. No one ever came by this late. She froze, listening. Another knock, firm, deliberate. She glanced at the baby, her protective instincts flaring. Whoever was at the door, they didn't know she was here. Or did they? Slowly, she crept toward the peephole. A man stood outside, his face partially hidden beneath the dim glow of the hallway light. He wore a dark coat, his posture tense. Something about him made her skin crawl. Emily stayed silent, barely daring to breathe. The man didn't knock again. Instead, he reached into his pocket and slipped something under her door. A small, folded piece of paper. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Emily waited, counting the seconds in her head before daring to pick up the paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. One sentence. You shouldn't have taken her. A cold dread spread through her chest. Someone knew. Her mind raced. How? Had they been watching the alley? Had they followed her home? And most importantly, who was they? She turned back to the baby, still lying quietly on the couch, oblivious to the storm unraveling around her. She should have called the police the moment she found her. But now it was too late for that. This wasn't just about an abandoned child anymore. This was something bigger, and whoever was behind it wasn't finished yet. Emily's hands clenched the note as her mind raced. The words burned into her thoughts. You shouldn't have taken her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave the baby at a hospital or a police station and distance herself from whatever she had stumbled into. But it was too late. Someone had seen her. Someone knew exactly what she had done. Her pulse pounded as she turned back to the couch, where the baby lay, still eerily quiet. She pressed her fingers gently against the infant's tiny hand, relieved to feel warmth. But why wasn't she crying? Something was wrong. A newborn left outside in the cold should be weak, but this felt different. Emily grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. Should she call the police now? Tell them everything? But if someone was watching, if they had followed her home, then what would stop them from coming after her before help could arrive? A sudden noise made her jump. A rustling sound, soft but distinct. Her breath hitched. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the apartment. Emily's gaze darted around the small space, her heart hammering. She had locked the door. No windows were open. She was alone. Wasn't she? She moved carefully, checking the kitchen, the tiny hallway leading to her bedroom. Nothing. The silence stretched, pressing in on her like a thick fog. Then she heard again, this time closer. Emily turned sharply, her eyes landing on the closet near the door. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. A deep, instinctive fear gripped her, but she forced herself to pull it open in one swift motion. Empty. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand against her forehead. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe the exhaustion, the stress, was playing tricks on her. Then from behind her a soft click. Her front door. Emily spun around just in time to see the handle twisting. Someone was trying to get in. She lunged for the deadbolt, twisting it back into place, just as the door jerked violently. She choked back a gasp, pressing her weight against the door as the unseen figure on the other side pushed against it. The baby stirred on the couch, but didn't cry, as if sensing the danger in the air. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She had to do something now. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and held it tightly in her hands. If whoever was out there got in, she wouldn't go down without a fight. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the pressure on the door stopped. Silence. Emily barely dared to breathe. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, fading down the hall. She forced herself to wait. 5 minutes, then 10. When she was sure whoever was had truly gone, she took a shaky step back. Her body trembled as she picked up the note from the floor, reading the words again. The warning was clear, but it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Whoever had abandoned this baby hadn't just walked away. They were watching, and they wanted her to know it. Emily's fingers tightened around the paper as a terrible realization settled over her. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Emily stood frozen, gripping the crumpled note in one hand and the heavy lamp in the other. Her breaths came in sharp, uneven gasps as she listened for any lingering sounds outside her door. Nothing. Whoever had tried to get in was gone for now. She forced herself to move, her body still trembling from the adrenaline. She needed to think clearly. She needed a plan. The baby still lay on the couch, bundled in the thin cloth, tiny chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Emily's fear shifted into something stronger, determination. Whoever had abandoned this child had expected her to stay silent, to leave it alone. But now that she had taken the baby, they were trying to scare her into giving up. She wasn't going to let that happen. Emily grabbed her phone and dialed the only person she could think of, Claire. Claire had been her best friend since college, the kind of person who could keep a level head in a crisis. She picked up on the second ring. Emily? It's late, what's going on? Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. She didn't even know where to start. Instead, she whispered, I need your help. There was a pause, then Claire's voice softened. Where are you? Emily hesitated before answering. Home. But I can't stay here. Are you in danger? Emily's grip tightened on the phone as she glanced at the baby. I don't know. I'm coming over, Claire said without hesitation. Don't open the door for anyone else. I'll be there in 10. The moment the call ended, Emily took a deep breath and started gathering things. A spare blanket, a small bag, anything to keep the baby warm. Her hands shook as she wrapped the child more securely, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You're safe," she whispered, more to reassure herself than anything else. Minutes later, a firm but familiar knock echoed through her apartment. Emily checked the peephole. "Claire?" Relief flooded through her as she unlocked the door and let her in. Claire stepped inside, immediately taking in the sight of the baby in Emily's arms and the fear in her eyes. What the hell is going on? Emily shut the door and locked it again before launching into everything. The cat, the dumpster, the note, the attempted break-in. Claire listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Emily finally finished, Claire let out a slow breath. "Okay, first, we need to get out of here. If someone is watching you, staying in your apartment isn't an option." Emily nodded. "But what about the baby? What if?" "We'll take her somewhere safe," Claire said firmly. "We'll figure this out." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. For the first time since this all started, she wasn't alone. They didn't waste time. Claire drove them out of the city, away from familiar streets, toward a place where they could think without fear of being watched. As they pulled into the empty parking lot of a small roadside diner, Claire turned to Emily. "You know we have to call someone, right? The police. Child services. Whoever left that note. If they're dangerous, you can't do this alone." Emily swallowed hard. She knew Claire was right, but a part of her still resisted. What if the person who did this is someone powerful? What if the police don't believe me? Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then we fight. We tell them everything." Emily exhaled shakily and, with one final glance at the sleeping baby, she dialed 911. The conversation was a blur. She explained what had happened, where she had found the baby, and that someone had tried to break into her apartment. The dispatcher's tone shifted from skeptical to urgent. They were told to stay put. Officers were on the way. When the police arrived, Emily braced herself for doubt, for them to dismiss her story. But to her surprise, they didn't. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, took one look at the baby and nodded. "We've been looking for her," she said. Emily's breath caught. "What?" The officer sighed, her expression grave. "There was a missing persons report filed 2 days ago. A young woman claimed her newborn niece had been taken from her sister's hospital room. But before we could follow up, she stopped returning our calls. We suspected something was wrong, but without more information, there wasn't much we could do." Claire exchanged a glance with Emily. "So, someone stole the baby?" The officer nodded. "And whoever had her didn't want us finding out." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "Who? We don't know yet. But this changes things." The officer took the baby carefully from Emily's arms, cradling her with gentle hands. "You may have just saved her life." Emily's chest tightened. She had been terrified, but deep down, she had known leaving the baby behind hadn't been an option. Hours later, after giving her full statement and being reassured that the baby was in safe hands, Emily sat outside the station, the weight of everything finally sinking in. Claire sat beside her, silent for a moment before nudging her shoulder. "You did the right thing," she said. Emily nodded, staring at the sky. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the quiet streets. The fear was still there, lingering in the corners of her mind. But for the first time, it wasn't the only thing she felt. Relief, hope, a strange sense of peace. The baby, whoever she was, had a chance now, a real one. And Emily knew, without a doubt, that if she had to do it all over again, she wouldn't change a thing. As Emily sat outside the station, the weight of everything she had been through settled over her. The exhaustion in her body was undeniable, but her mind wouldn't rest. The baby was safe now, and the police were investigating. That should have been enough. But something still didn't sit right. She kept thinking about the note. You shouldn't have taken her. It wasn't just a warning, it was personal. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been desperate enough to come to her apartment and try to scare her into silence. But why? Claire shifted beside her, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" Emily hesitated before shaking her head. "No, I can't stop thinking about who left that note." Claire frowned. The police will figure it out. You did your part. Emily wanted to believe that, but a nagging feeling told her it wasn't over yet. Just then, the station doors opened, and Officer Ramirez, the woman who had taken her statement, walked toward them, her expression unreadable. Emily's stomach twisted. "We just got some new information," Ramirez said. "And I thought you want to know." Emily straightened. "Did you find out who took the baby?" Ramirez nodded, but there was something uneasy in her eyes. "Yes, and we also know who tried to break into your apartment." Emily's pulse quickened. "Who?" The officer exhaled. "The woman who originally reported the baby missing. Her name is Vanessa Tate. She's the mother's younger sister. She came to us claiming her niece had been kidnapped from the hospital, but when we started digging, things didn't add up. We tried contacting her again, but she disappeared. That was 2 days ago." Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. "And—" Ramirez exchanged a glance with another officer before continuing. "We found Vanessa this morning. She was inside a motel room on the outskirts of town, alive but terrified. She claimed she was being followed." Emily's mind raced. "By who?" Ramirez hesitated. "That's where things get complicated. Because according to her, it wasn't the baby who was kidnapped from the hospital. It was her." Emily blinked. "What?" "She says her sister never had a child," Ramirez explained carefully. "She insists the baby was never supposed to exist." Claire let out a sharp breath. "That doesn't make any sense." Emily's heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Are you saying the mother?" Ramirez nodded. "We're looking into it, but Vanessa believes her sister was involved in something dangerous. Something she didn't fully understand until it was too late. She was trying to protect the baby, but the moment she filed the missing persons report, she knew she'd made a mistake. That's when she disappeared. Whoever was after her, they were watching." Emily felt her stomach twist. "And now they know I got involved." Ramirez's expression darkened. "That's what we're worried about." A heavy silence settled over them. Emily swallowed hard, her thoughts spiraling. Had she been a pawn in something much bigger than she had realized? Ramirez's voice was steady but firm. "We have officers stationed near your apartment, just in case. But I need you to be careful. If someone really was watching Vanessa, there's a chance they saw you too." Emily gripped the edge of the bench. "What happens now?" Ramirez exhaled. "We're still piecing it together. But one thing is clear. Whoever left that baby in the dumpster didn't want her to be found. And if they think you know too much, they won't stop." A cold dread settled in Emily's chest. She had saved the baby, but had she just put herself in danger? Claire reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll figure this out." Emily forced herself to nod, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The truth was still out there, lurking in the shadows. And someone, somewhere, was still watching.